I just returned from a trip to the Mississippi River. By far and away, for this particular outing, my best lure to catch numbers and quality was a jig. We're going to look at side-by-side footage underwater of how we often get stuck dragging a jig, and then what a difference focusing on tiny movements makes. And while dropping a jig vertically did produce some bites, the most effective retrieve, and one that I use most of the time when jig fishing, was a very, very slow drag. The fishing was tough on this trip, and the bass were not in that hyper-aggressive mood where they devour anything that you throw. Sound familiar? So when we found one, searching with something a little quicker, let's say a swim jig, my brother and I then soaked an extremely small area over with lots of casts, and the results were well worth the effort. First, let's look at the retrieve we often fall into the habit of doing when dragging a jig. I know I've done this a lot until I started watching the lures underwater. Well, this is your popular 9 to noon or 9 to 11 type vertical rod movement. It feels like we are fishing slow, but when you look underwater at the impact this small wrist movement makes with a rod 7 foot or longer, you can see that this jig is absolutely flying across the bottom and covering a massive amount of water. As I mentioned earlier, if the fish are aggressive, you can really clean up doing this. But if you are confident you are in an area that has bass hanging out, and this is not working, use this alternate retrieve method. You can either turn to the side and really focus on your rod tip to see how far you are moving the jig, or you can point your rod at the lure and use small reel movements, something like a quarter turn of a handle, whichever you prefer. Here are those smaller movements underwater, and in a second we will look at these retrieves side by side so you can really compare the two. If you imagine that you have captured the curiosity of a bass in the area, you can see how these extremely small and subtle movements are much more likely to pass the close-up scrutiny of a predator. Doug Hannon, the bass professor, used to call it intense scrutiny. And I've got a video I'm actually working on about that very topic. Now, here is the footage side by side. As you can see, one lure is flying by, covering a lot of ground, and the other is just inching along. Very different. And like I mentioned, on an aggressive bite, the bigger movements can work incredibly well. But most days, at least on the waters I fish often, this more subtle movement is much more productive for me once I have located some fish. This inching along retrieve isn't for covering vast amounts of water. And if you are an angler that just can't slow yourself down this much, mix in this retrieve every once in a while to help you decipher what mood the fish are in. Then you can adjust from there if you like. And hey, if you would like to watch a video that compares the new rattling bladed jig, the rattling Thunder Cricket, to the original model and listen to what a hydrophone picked up underwater, go ahead and check this video out right here. And make sure that you go out and encourage someone today. You never know how you might just change their life. For the Bass Fishing Life, I'm your host, Steve Rogers.